Welcome to the Fertile Dark, where we journey into the uncharted depths of the human psyche. I'm your host, Daniel, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this profound journey into the shadow. Today's episode is particularly powerful as we're diving into the concept of the shadow in psychology and how embracing and integrating it can lead to greater self-acceptance and wholeness. In the depths of every individual is a realm that is rarely explored, a territory that is shrouded in darkness, also ripe with potential. And today we are going to illuminate the shadows of that realm, unraveling the mysteries of what is hidden within. Quick Google search for shadow work reveals a plethora of information. The Essential Guide for Shadow Work, a 3-part guide for integrating your dark side, 75 shadow work prompts for self-discovery and acceptance. It's so common to see the way that we describe the shadow as this part of ourselves that is disgusting, despicable, the worst parts of ourselves. And while it is true that the shadow, by its very name, holds darkness, as Robert Johnson said in his book Owning Your Own Shadow, it is also astonishing to find that some very good characteristics turn up in the shadow. Generally, the ordinary, mundane characteristics are the norm. Anything less than this goes in the shadow. But anything better also goes into the shadow. Some of the pure gold of our personality is relegated to the shadow because it can find no place in that great leveling process that is culture. He also goes on to share that Jung warned us that it would not be too difficult to get the skeletons out of the closet from a patient in analysis, but it would be exceedingly difficult to get the gold out of the shadow. People are as frightened of their capacity for nobility as of their darkest sides. If you find the gold in someone, he will resist it to the last ounce of his strength. So today, as we approach the shadow, we want to do so from a perspective that it contains not only our darkness, but also a golden nobility. So join us as we embark on a transformative exploration of approaching shadow work from a place of self-acceptance, revealing the profound power that lies within it, embracing both our darkest corners and the golden nobility within. Society have deemed unacceptable. It's also important to realize that the shadow is a living part of our personality that resides in the unconscious. And these aspects of ourselves are there because they've been repressed or oppressed or cut off to meet some kind of social or cultural demand, often associated with the collective shadow, which encompasses the darker aspects of human nature that are shared by all. Interestingly, the shadow is described as being present at the doorway to the anima or animus, which can be seen as the seat of the soul or the inner self, that place within us that is the core of our authentic expression. Recognizing the shadow involves becoming aware of these repressed parts of ourselves. And there are some really helpful ways that we can use to be able to recognize when those things are coming to the surface. Part of the challenge with the shadow is that it is under the surface of consciousness. And because it has been left there, it's essentially feral. And it will come out exploding to the surface with that intense feral energy into the world. And so we want to make sure that we are on the lookout for the manifestation of the shadow in our daily interactions. So here are some ways that we can identify it. Number one is through projection, when we attribute our own undesirable traits or emotions to others. So some ways we might see this: when you have that scornful attitude towards somebody else, thinking of the world in terms of punishment, Like, why am I being punished? There's that immature view of life, almost like a parent-child relationship with the universe. Why are you punishing me? There are also moments of explosive anger or scapegoating that almost don't make sense to us after the fact. There's also the beginning of that sentence, the beginning of that idea, if only. Alternatively, because the shadow contains not just darkness, but also gold, we might project our positive traits onto others, resulting in some forms of hero worship. And so you might just consider, who are those people in your life that you lionize, the people that you put on that pedestal, and consider, what are the attributes that they possess that lead you to put them on that pedestal? That is an indicator to you of the gold within your shadow. Dreams and other outer experiences can also provide glimpses of our shadow. It's also important that we realize that other people are going to be able to see aspects of ourselves that we can't, and they will help to point those aspects out to us. If you want some further study on that, you might consider looking up the Johari window, which goes into this with a little bit more depth and detail. Another way that we can identify the shadow is dissociation, when we feel disconnected from parts of ourselves. And that can be a sign of the shadow at work as well. For example, a common experience that I have is when talking to people about the idea of life purpose. You watch people shut down or change the subject. They can't handle the topic. And so either turn off their attention or go somewhere else. And this is a great example of what we're talking about. This dissociative pattern is indicating that the shadow is present for them. Finally, let's not forget the trickster archetype, which brings the shadow to our attention in unexpected ways. Think of your favorite comedian. What are the aspects of society that are distasteful that they routinely bring to the surface through humor? This is the trickster in its function of helping to bring attention to the shadow in the collective, which in turn is connected to our personal shadow. So now that we know how to recognize it, or at least some ways to recognize the shadow within ourselves, we want to consider, why is it important to embrace it? Well, the journey of shadow integration is profoundly transformative. By facing our shadow, we move toward discovering the meaning of our suffering and ultimately towards wholeness. Jung talked about the trial and the struggle that we experience as a trial of wisdom, where we take wisdom and personify it. And wisdom puts us through a trial to teach us things. So as we listen to the voice of wisdom that is within the struggle, it will point us towards the place of wholeness that is on the other side of the thing that needs integrating the most. Jung talked about this integration of the shadow as the apprentice piece of our individual development that leads to the integration of the anima or animus, which is the masterpiece of our individual development. And we'll talk more about the anima and the animus and purpose and that deepest authenticity in the future. But for now, it's important to realize that the shadow sits at the doorway to that place of deepest authenticity. It's also important to realize that the shadow holds a tremendous amount of energy. So much of the time, as I talk to people on a daily basis, everyone is so tired. They're just exhausted. They're so worn out. And embracing the shadow actually helps us access the energy that is stored within those repressed parts of ourselves. And so by acknowledging and accepting our shadow, rather than allowing it to continue to accumulate and store up within us, we then gain access to that energy. It's also important to realize that in the same way that a primary mode of recognizing the shadow within ourselves is through our personal projections, by integrating the shadow, by working with our personal shadow, that actually empowers us to resist the projections of shadow by other people, which frees us up from external judgment and expectation, rather than those judgments and expectations sticking to us, acting like gasoline on a fire within our own personal shadow. Those things slide right past us. They can't stick. Or we're able to temporarily hold those projections and then give them back, functioning then as the role of the friend who helps us to see those things in ourselves that we can't see ourselves, but this time for other people. Finally, what feels like of equal importance to our individual development through this work, as we work with our personal shadow, the darkness and the gold, it moves us closer to repairing a very fractured world as we first begin to heal the divisions that exist within ourselves. How do we do it? It's very important. It's not just important for integrating the parts of ourselves that we dislike, but also in accessing the best parts of ourselves. So, what's the process? What are some ways we can do it? First things first, we can't work with this unconscious material unless we're in the right space. We have to be prepared mentally and emotionally. Shadow work is not a journey for the faint of heart. It requires a willingness to confront the darkest parts of ourselves and a commitment to personal growth. It's going to take courage. It's going to take determination. I personally find that the internal family systems, or IFS framework, helps me know when am I in the right place to do this. The tendency that I find is that as I realize something has happened, something has broken to the surface from underneath my conscious awareness, I often feel very critical. I feel hypercritical. I feel shame. I feel guilt. These are normal reactions. And also, we need to be very careful in beginning to work with unconscious material from that place. The internal family systems model allows us to have a framework to recognize some key attributes that help us know, hey, I'm in the right place to be able to move forward. So we have 8 C's and 5 P's. The 8 C's are calmness, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. The 5 P's: patience, persistence, perspective, playfulness, and presence. When these things are present, we are in a grounded, centered place that allows us to be able to work with our system from the right frame, rather than being taken over by or blended with these shadowy manifestations. We are able to be in a place of self-awareness, self-acceptance, and compassion and curiosity, which is required to take us on that journey of discovery, as well as to bring courage with us, because we will find some things that are in there that we may not want to see. Remember, things are in the shadow because they have been cut off. Something happened socially or culturally that said this is not appropriate. And in order to survive, we buried those things. And sometimes facing those things again can be very, very hard. So we need courage and also compassion for ourselves and those experiences that we've had. We also need to acknowledge that there are some problems we can't solve on our own. When we do that, when we have that honest conversation with ourselves, that there is something within that I can't take care of myself. Jung describes that as giving us an advantage that prepares the ground for a compensatory reaction from the collective unconscious. It puts us in an advantageous position to delve into the unconscious, to meet the shadow, and begin to integrate it into a place of wholeness. Sometimes that requires some help from therapists, counselors, trusted friends that can provide the guidance and encouragement needed to navigate that challenging journey. So now that we're in the right frame of mind, let's look at some practical approaches to engaging in shadow work. Right out of the gate, rituals and ceremonies can be some very powerful tools for creating a safe, sacred space to confront our shadow. And these are practices that can help symbolically and emotionally to prepare for the work that is ahead. We're actually going to talk about ritual and ceremony in our next episode, so make sure that you're tuned in. Next, active imagination is another technique that's recommended by Jung and other depth psychologists. It involves dialoguing with different parts of ourselves, including our shadow, to gain insights and foster some integration, and is a great way to bring unconscious material into conscious awareness. If this is something that you want to hear more about in the future, please let me know, and we can dive much deeper into the nature of active imagination and maybe even talk about some experiences of what that looks like. Third, journaling. This can be written, it can be verbal, and it's an excellent method for exploring the shadow. Through a regular documentation of our thoughts, our dreams, our experiences, it can help us to see patterns and gain clarity about our hidden aspects there. The key here is finding the patterns. Also, one type of journaling that we just mentioned is journaling our dreams, which, as we talked about at the beginning, dreams can help us to identify that shadow material. The wisdom of dreams is another topic that's coming up very soon in the near future. Next, creative expression. Things like poetry, music, art, dance. All of these offer creative outlets for shadow work. And these forms of expression can help us to really process and integrate emotions that are difficult to articulate in other ways. Lastly, as we discussed already, therapy is an invaluable resource for those that are in this journey into the unconscious. A skilled therapist can provide a supportive environment and help us navigate the complexities of our inner world, as well as offer some strategies to integrate those things that are hiding out below the surface, both the dark things and the things of gold. So in conclusion, we have delved into the depths of the human psyche. We've explored the shadow and its profound impact on our journey towards self-acceptance and wholeness. We discussed what the shadow is, how to recognize it, the importance of embracing it. We also covered practical approaches to engage in shadow work and emphasized the need for courage, determination, and support. As we continue on this journey together, I'd really encourage you to reflect on your own shadow and consider taking the first steps towards integration. Look for those evidences of projection on others. Start to keep a journal of your dreams. Find ways to see the attributes in others that we hold up on a pedestal. The path to self-acceptance and wholeness is challenging, but it is also incredibly rewarding. Join us in the next episode of The Fertile Dark, where we explore the role of rituals and ceremony in spiritual growth. We're going to dive into how these practices can enhance our spiritual journey and foster a deeper connection with ourselves and the world around us. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. I'd love to hear your feedback, your questions, or suggestions for future episodes. You can reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, or at fertiledark@gmail.com. I'm really interested to hear from you. What are you liking? What do you wish was different? What are the things you want to hear more about? And until next time, keep delving deep and embracing the journey.